Mike, thank you for joining me yet again on this podcast. I am really excited to get your thoughts and views on what is a very emotive subject, which is the NHS waiting lists, and particularly how technology impacts that. So let's start by talking about the NHS waiting list. We are facing a major issue, aren't we, across the NHS, where we have extremely long waiting lists, around the sort of 7 million, nearly 8 million mark of people potentially waiting for elective surgery. I mean, this is clearly quite a worrying situation.
Yeah, no, it really is, and there's two sides of the story, isn't there? And we talked about the older population being, we've got a lot more older people around living longer, and is that because of medical technologies? And interestingly, these numbers are from Advamed. Medical advancements in medical devices and diagnostics have increased life expectancy by more than 5 years since the 1980s. So in the 1980s, the average life expectancy was 73.7 years, and now it's 78.8, and that's due to medical technology. So you can sort of blame medical technologies on one side as, scanning and all the great treatments that are out there have actually helped people to live longer. And then the other side of it is, of course, that due to medical devices, if you look at advancements in technologies, have reduced fatalities from heart disease and stroke by 49% since the 1990s.
Wow.
So, people are living longer because of better treatments, faster diagnosis, endovascular approaches, CT scanners, getting to the problem quicker. And then if you look at cancer, so that's heart disease and stroke. If you look at cancer, screenings due to improved medical technology have helped reduce deaths of breast cancer by 43% since 1989's peak, prostate by 53% since its peak in 93, but cancer overall by 32% since the 90s. So because of medical technologies, and we're not talking about drugs here, it's purely medical technologies and scanning and diagnostics, that's the impact on people's lives in terms of, cancer, stroke, and general sort of life expectancy. To top the lot, what medical technologies have actually done to help the hospitals and help the patients as well, because you don't want to be in hospital unless you're born, really, and that's it. You want to try and stay out for as long as you can, or if you're having a baby, is that length of stay, average length of stay has reduced by 38% since the 80s. And that's all the technologies, the keyhole surgery, endovascular, better knowledge on how to manage patients, getting them through the hospital and out quicker, and better rehabilitation as well. So that's the impact, and it's had an effect on people living longer, which means they're having to come back for they're part of this waiting list, and then the positive effects on cancer and stroke and heart disease. But I think that going back to your question, yes, devices, medical devices have shown to solve these problems and get people treated less invasively, better outcomes, reducing deaths, and so it's really a powerful message to everybody to say how great medical devices are.
Well, absolutely, and I've been, and I'm sure you have. I mean, we've all been touched by some kind of medical treatment, from the day that we're born, really. Yeah. But I have been the recipient of medical treatment through screening, through cervical screening, and then through discovering cervical cancer and having a hysterectomy with laparoscopic robotic surgery. Yeah. So I have been a huge beneficiary over the last few years of having treatments that have all involved major pieces of technology, MRI scans and things like that, to understand what was going on inside me. So, for me, I'm really pleased that technology's there. Yeah. But we are still seeing these growing waiting lists, particularly since COVID, aren't we? And also this issue around what has been loosely termed the hidden waiting list, which are people who are in between those stages
Yeah.
and maybe waiting for GP callbacks or waiting to go for screening or things like that. So that's adding potentially, we're not sure how many, but somewhere between 7 and 11 million more people.
Yeah.
So we're potentially looking at a waiting list of 20 million people.
Yeah.
So you know, what do we do with that?
I mean, it's a really, really big question, isn't it? And interestingly, this report, which was done by the University of Birmingham back in 2022 about the waiting list, also is saying that most patients that are waiting for elective surgery are of working age.
Right.
So you know, not only, you know, maybe a perception that these people are old, and you know, a lot of them do have needing hip replacements and cataracts and things like that, but the majority of patients are of working age, and so that's having an effect on productivity as a country. And I've got some, you know, other numbers that you know, the work capacity assessment decisions from 22 to 25 by the Department of for Work and Pensions shows that, you know, the biggest problem, you know, the sort of biggest payouts are on mental health, musculoskeletal, digestive system, circulatory, respiratory, nervous, endocrine, metabolic, genitourinary system, eyes, and skin and subcutaneous tissue. And so, you know, you look at all of those and it's like, you know, the country's paying out to manage people with benefits that could, you know, if they were seen sooner, treated sooner, and got back to work quicker, then the whole country would be in a better state than it is. And so there's several things to think about. You know, here's an interesting one. Right at the bottom, 165,000 patients here receiving benefits for diseases of skin and subcutaneous tissue. You know, as part of my work with the MedTech Innovator Programme, so I'm a value judge. I've been a value judge for several years. And what that means is that MedTech Innovator is one of the world's biggest accelerator programs. It's the US system where companies get involved and they get supported with different prizes and support through a program. And there's a winner. And interestingly, one company, you know, looking at the bottom one here about skin and subcutaneous tissue, I got chatting to a guy in Australia that presented this great little device. It was like a pen that you can basically, if you've got a skin lesion, looks like cancer, then you put the pen in, it clicks, takes a tiny sample of it, put the lid on, send it to a lab, and it will tell you if you've got skin cancer or not.
Wow.
And so you think, well, that's great. So what problem does it solve? Well, right now, today, we've got a 25% vacancy rate in dermatologists today. And they anticipate it's something like 7 or 11% increase in skin cancer in the next 7 or 8 years. So we've got a growing problem of patients that we know more patients are going to get cancer, probably because they're older, you know, whatever, you know. And so you've got a growing problem. You've got a situation where the doctors that diagnose that condition, there's already a 25% shortage today. And how long is it going to take for us to catch up to have enough doctors? So the only thing that solves those sort of problems are technologies.
Yeah.
And the ability for a patient to take a sample and send it to a lab in the same way as other ones are done. So there's a great example, really, of one at the bottom of this list that we could look at.
And that's the smallest group, isn't it?
That's the smallest group.
And you make a really valuable point there, because as we're seeing changes in our climate, as we're seeing more heat-induced healthcare issues around the world, this kind of technology is going to be vital, particularly in rural areas. So you know, and that's just the bottom of the list. At the top of that list, as you rightly said, are mental health and behavioural issues.
Disorders,
I mean, this is something that society really needs to be addressing, isn't it? And we can throw lots of technology at this sort of stuff. But we also have a responsibility, I think, to address some of these problems ourselves. Do you think there are things, and there may be technology solutions that we really need to be introducing rapidly to get people back to work, or to get them to a place where they're safe and well?
Exactly. And that's where I think the United States are streets ahead of the world in this sort of, okay, so if we can't get those patients, if they have a long-term condition, patients have a long-term condition that used to rely on hospitalization, there's enough technology. There's enough technology in this great room of yours, actually, Helen. But there's enough technology there that I saw 12 years ago that could manage people remotely. Things, wearable sensors now. We've seen the likes of the glucose monitoring technologies that sort of I helped to support one of them several years ago, the Freestyle Libre. But literally, there's so many of those wearable technologies now out there that are enabling people in America to live independently at home, where not only, you used to see these adverts for old people wearing these things around the neck, and if they fell over, they pressed a button. I mean, these things now, and the way that wearable technologies and batteries have come such a long way. There's sensors that can know your GPS location, your temperature, stress, whether you're lying down, standing up, skin temperature, all of that and more besides can be done through all sorts of technologies. Wearing sort of Apple Watches does a fair bit of that. But if you can imagine a system where patients can be managed remotely and out of hospital sooner, either sooner or out of hospital, those things exist. The problem we have in our country is, and I've been lobbying and trying to get people to recognise this, is there is a very, very difficult mechanism of payment in our country when it comes to giving people technologies so they can be managed at home. Now, some things like hemodialysis, home nutrition, wound care, catheters, dressing, all that stuff, you've been able to, doctors have been able to prescribe those types of technologies. So the mechanism of reimbursement is, you've got, you need dialysis. So there's a prescription written, and the health system commissions a dialysis machine in your house and all the liquids and solutions and consumables that goes with it. But there's a limited amount of those products available in that sort of prescription system. What I'm trying to get at is these things that manage people at home, we used to call it telemedicine, are incredibly difficult to get paid for, because who's paying for them? Now, traditionally, you wouldn't expect a hospital to pay for something that's happening in people's homes. And so it was expected that primary care funded it, but their whole, I see that the primary care is fully focused on giving prescriptions for drugs and pharmaceutical prescribing and not medical technology. So I think that there needs to be a change, and there are glimmers of hope in the background, but there needs to be a change of funding and reimbursement, simplifying the funding of medical devices for people to have at home so that it doesn't become a multi-year effort for industry and payers and providers to work together to fund these and move budgets around so they can fund these things. And I think with the changes I just call them payers because they used to be called clinical commissioning groups, ICSs, ICBs, ICB, this, that and the other, but they're all payers. The bottom line of it is that there is this more longer term look at cost that never really happened before, where payers are more interested in 2 and 3 year outcomes versus a 12-month outcome. So going back to we talked on the last podcast about a technology that solved a problem with sacroiliac joint pain, which was, cost neutral at 8 years versus the comparator, which is painkillers and physiotherapy. Those sort of things, it's a bit more favourable now because they're looking at those long-term outcomes. So there's different ways, isn't there, of this waiting list. It's either keeping people out of hospital for longer or keeping people inpatient for shorter periods and then getting them managed in the community longer term and tracking those outcomes so that we know things will work, they're safe, they're affordable, it's good commissioning, and that sort of helps to solve that problem. But
I mean, you were talking there about technology in the home environment, and I know that there are a couple of universities in the UK that are developing carpets that have got sensors in, so that they can monitor gait, for example. So if a person may be at risk of falling, like an elderly person, it can actually predict, not just detect the fall, but predict the fall. These are the kinds of technologies that we can embed into people's homes that are non-invasive, that are not in people's way, that will make them feel a lot safer in their home environment, where they can recover much more quickly, as we know. It's proven that people do recover better at home, and we can give them that chance. So the technology is there. We know that
the
technology is
been there for years, and it's evolving, and a lot of the things that were approved have been superseded now as technology, particularly, as I say, the battery technologies. But when you look at the waiting list, the top 20 procedures, which start off at the highest need, interestingly, in the waiting list is sigmoidoscopy and colonoscopy, followed by gastroscopy. And that's according to this report from Birmingham. So you've got a massive amount. That's telling me there's a lot of upper GI cancer, there's a lot of colorectal cancer, and that's being reflected in conversations I'm having with people that are saying, we've had an explosion of colorectal cancer, an explosion of upper GI cancer. Maybe it's diet, lots of reasons. And then cataracts, lower limb, joint replacement, interventional cardiology, ureteroscopy, cystoscopy, excision of lesion of skin is in the top 7, and that's the one really, we're talking about skin cancer here. Operations on bladder, that's for, obviously, I would imagine predominantly things like benign prostatic hyperplasia, stress incontinence, procedures, peripheral nerve procedures, operations on ear, spinal nerve root procedures, nose, groin hernia, arthroscopic, surgery on ligament, tendon and muscle, hysteroscopy, other day case spinal, and tonsillectomy and proctology. So that's the sort of, from the top to the bottom need. And, looking at this list of technologies that I've been involved in, things that, are able to remove cancer from inside the bowel without having to open people up, developed by a company in Wales called Creo Medical, could solve, a lot of problems around patients with colorectal cancer, shortening length of stay, the ability to remove the cancer from going sort of from the south north and not going and opening people up and using robots and laparoscopic stuff. There's so many things out there that are able to do things that could be introduced. And then, some of them, cataracts, can be done fairly quickly. But it's also, technologies like you're looking at lower limb joint replacement, knee and knee pain. There's technologies now that offer other approaches to that, to not have to go through the sort of pain and discomfort of open surgery, to have something that will help you to mobilize or reduce pain. Or, there was a shoe that was recently recommended by NICE that enabled people with knee pain to use a special shoe which reduced pain and helped them to get over it. So there's lots of things that could really help to solve this.
I could definitely do with one of those because I have osteoarthritis in my knees.
Right.
And again, from doing a lot more sitting and not exercising as much. Yeah. And a lot of those illnesses you're talking about there are things because of our lifestyles, aren't they? They're things that can be put right by just general changes to living and lifestyle. But I wanted to come to a very real point, which is about what people often hear on the news as the postcode lottery when it comes to healthcare. We know from research that's been done, particularly around rural communities, and you live in the beautiful area of the country down in Devon, but we know that there are poorer communities there and up here on the East Coast as well, who are missing out on some of this technology. Do you think that we should, when I say we, as an industry and also talking to the government, be thinking about those sort of communities and how technology could favour them in terms of dealing with a lot of what is, illness due to the environment and the living environment of the people in those communities.
Yeah, and there has been so many developments of, where patients are, a long way from hospital, or you have a region like the Southwest where you've got, Truro, Plymouth, Exeter, Taunton, Barnstable. There's a lot of population that's spread across. I think it's interesting when I talk to industry about bringing technologies to the UK. Often they want to go to London, and London is a very different sort of population, age group, often younger people, really, I think, there. But it's about understanding, if your industry, go to where you can solve the problem faster and prove. I think it's, if industry did a better job of showing they were solving problems in those communities and collecting the data, the longitudinal, long-term patient-recorded outcome measure data, and showing that the problem, going back to the podcast we did earlier, is that we don't have a health technology assessment body that gives a sort of a consistent what I'm looking at, the system isn't built around mandated funding of medical devices.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is that NICE, been around for 25 years now, they were initially introduced to evaluate drugs, and devices and diagnostics were bolted onto those programs. But when you actually look at where the NHS mandated funding goes with it's really surprising. Out of the, I think it's 857 NICE technology appraisals. So NICE have a whole suite of programs depending on whether you're a pharma, whether you're a drug diagnostic, whether it's looking at safety and efficacy, whether it's looking at clinical pathways. But looking at the programs that the ones that fund, that say you must have this thing, whatever it is, drug or device available within, was it 60 or 90 days of NICE giving that sort of stamp of approval and budget to say that everybody should have this. In medical device world, there's only been one cancer therapy out of, I think, 657 evaluations that NICE have done in 25 years that have had that funding direction behind. So one in cancer out of, I think there's 657 drugs have been given, cancer drugs have been given mandated funding. So the funding stream, when it comes to technologies, they just don't enjoy the same amount of funding or mandated government financial backing as drugs do.
Yeah.
So there's this expectation, and we see it within the amount of prescriptions and the increase in prescription volumes that have been going on. The medtech industry don't have that benefit of having mandated funding behind it. Even if they have programs like the medtech funding mandate, it doesn't mean it's mandated by funding. It's a strange use of NHS language, really. So going back to your question, if industry, if these rural communities were real problems where you have patients that live longer with longer term conditions that end up costing the healthcare system more, if they are a problem population, then if the industry actually looked at where they were going and what they were saying and how they were solving problems with technologies, then maybe they would find that these communities are experiencing patients with worse outcomes because they're not being seen so quickly, and they could really show the value of what they're bringing in, and maybe in time medical devices would enjoy the same benefit of funding that drugs do. Big answer to a question, really, but I'm trying to think of solutions around technologies. But yes, it does. The thing is, the data will tell us about those communities if the industry and the scientists looked at these to see whether they were more of a problem, whether they were costing the healthcare system more money long term, and so it can be addressed, definitely.
Yeah. So perhaps there's some incentives then for industry to do some of these longitudinal studies, perhaps working with universities to actually collate that data, so we do have something that we can work on, and ensure that the right technology is getting to the right people for the right reasons.
Exactly, and I think it's about the focus away from showing something that's clinically effective to showing that it's a good use of resources and funding for a payer perspective. And that's part of the problem we talked about earlier, is the industry focuses on clinical people and not payers and providers. They expect the clinical people to talk to the payers and providers, but really it's not their job, they're clinicians. So if there was a mindset of we're bringing in something we're going to show that works, that's effective, that we can also show is affordable long-term and has great long-term outcomes. That's the starting blocks of how to get technologies into healthcare systems. And talked about this previously, you and I, Helen. But the part of the problem is that the industry uses what's known as the principles of marketing, which are product, price, place, promotion. So they get a product, they work out the price. they find a place and they promote it. And those 4 Ps of marketing are probably why a lot of technologies fail, because marketing of sausages to supermarkets are very different to marketing long-term sort of implants that have an effect on everybody, from the patient, provider, and payer. So the 4 Ps of market access, as I describe, are, if you're inventing a technology, make sure it benefits patients. That's the most important thing. It's safe, it works. It benefits the care providers that use them, the hospitals that use the technologies. It benefits the payer that pays the hospital to use it, and that the product benefits from being profitable, and that the technology and the company can last and be fruitful. If they're solving, the part of the process of solving these problems, they should be enjoying the environment like they do in the United States. So I think it's there's some of the principles that I've learned, and I've seen so many examples of where that's really great technologies haven't got to patients because of strange payer-provider relationships. And then in America, of course, that's where it gets even more interesting, because there's another P there, and that's physician benefit, and that's about money and often repeat treatment. So other healthcare systems in the world are peculiar. In, for example, Germany, there has been changes, but Germany like patients to stay in hospitals for longer because the hospitals earn more money. Now, that's sort of great when you've got lots of excess beds and lots of hospitals, but Germany are struggling a bit now with beds and staff, as all countries are. But there is a change to more ambulatory treatment, but it's not the place to go with a minimally invasive, fast ambulatory treatment. As America, you've got a system where physicians, the more they see the patients, the more they earn. Yeah. And the more often they see them, the longer they see them, the more tests they do. It's a whole industry. And I actually think that the NHS has the right balance out of all of it, really. And when you look at it cares, it should care long term. It looks at it manages patients. The doctors earn a salary, and there's nice and better principles of healthcare here. But it also makes it challenging to bring technologies in.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you a question about, how do we triage this sort of thing? How do we make sure that technology is getting to patients? But I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. It's about changing the approach, going away from this traditional way of engaging with the NHS and engaging with the service providers. Yeah. And actually getting industry to sit down with the people who have the purse strings, understand what the patients actually need, and be able to address it in a completely different way. But to change that, I mean, we've been doing it so long now, 80 years or so of the NHS. Yeah. How do we get around to triaging that into something completely different?
I mean, I think it's a really good question, actually, Helen, because I think, we talked about this earlier, industry needs to up the game. They need to stop selling things on price and saying they're better, and they need to put data behind them and show that these products are working long term, and having a different approach to selling the problem they solve, not the product. The second thing is, about change management within the NHS. It's not working as it is. It's really slow. Some hospitals adopt things quickly, others don't. Why is that? I think there needs to be another sort of set of skills, and that's engineers, which I'm a big fan of what you're doing.
Well, I'm all for that.
But there has to be something about change management that goes beyond financial and clinical. The step changes, and when you're dealing with multi decision makers, once they've decided it's safe, it works, you can train people, then the management of that becomes challenging. And I think somebody else needs to manage that in a way that I love the engineers. I really never knew what engineers did in healthcare. And I ended up working, and hopefully you'll watch this, a guy called Alan Trzynski from a company called Araya, an American company. And he was an engineer, and I thought, what's he doing in this? And I really don't have a clue, but the way that you think about the processes of getting through, changes of, management, and, with something like healthcare, you definitely need this because it's so multidisciplinary. Yeah. You're not just dealing with a patient in that time in hospital, which is how the industry thinks. No, we'll get them in, treat them and kick them out, and we get paid for our box of 10 and everybody's happy. It's what happens beyond that. And justification of change, justification of management, showing that this has as a positive outcome, because often companies just focus on showing the thing works and is safe, and they're not showing that long-term outcome that can be done through mechanisms of collecting evidence longitudinally from patients, and that comes back in and needs to be managed to show the effect and the positive effect of change. So there needs to be somebody else.
I've always said that developing a medical device, regardless of what it is, certainly the more complex end of medical device manufacture is as complicated as building an aeroplane, and the systems, as you said, the different disciplines that go into it, the systems of systems within it, which enable it to function, is very similar to the way that we really need to think about the NHS. It is a very complex system of systems. And you change one small bit in one small system can have a huge knock-on effect across the entire network. So I'm always going to say that engineers need to be in there to help, but we definitely, as more technology comes into the environment, as more technology goes into the patient environment, we need to be having engineers who, biomedical, clinical, as they're known in the NHS, who understand both the clinical aspect and the technical aspect, and be able to bring and communicate across those two languages. So I'm absolutely for that. Biggest cheerleader. Now, I wanted to talk about the future, I guess. Looking at some of the data that you showed me, and this is a Lancet Journal paper as well, isn't it? So we'll make sure that that's available for people to look at. It's predicted that by 2030, if waiting lists continue at their current trajectory, we could need an 8.4% increase in elective procedure volume per year to eliminate the list by the end of the decade. Now, I mean, that apparently correlates to a 50% increase above pre-pandemic volume by December 2029. I mean, that just to me sounds impossible. What type of interventions are we going to need to get anywhere close to those kind of figures? I mean, the technology just blows my mind, really.
I mean, it is. There's this sort of perception that we need a lot more people. For example, migrants to help people and manage people. There's this perception that we need lots more people here to do it. But we've already proven that technologies have had a profound effect on patients' lives, and I think it's going to need a seismic shift in remote patient monitoring, and making sure that we can keep people out of hospital for longer until they really need to come into hospital. They try other methods of treatments that may or may not be available besides drugs. Obviously, there's been an explosion in new drugs coming to market, but I think it really does need, we need to harness technology. And luckily, the sort of people that are going to be in that sort of category are going to be more digital savvy than those that were around 5 or 10 years ago that can enable these technologies to be used. So I think, technology is an interesting thing. Somebody else had mentioned to me is that technology will save the NHS, and that's what we need to look at. Look at those high priority areas. Look at the whole management of patients from admission to discharge, from when they hit the first spot, whether they're elective or whether they're emergency patients. I mean, it's an opportunity. It's such a big opportunity for technology, but you need to have the business environment and a consistent approach to the assessment and reimbursement of technologies to make the UK an attractive place to bring those things, because we've seen so many things that have been very slow in being adoptive, particularly in the community, because of this problem in payment of devices that occur outside of hospital, and there being no mechanism for the payment of them because you can't swallow them like drugs. I mean, I would agree with you. And
I don't want to be too controversial here, but I've said for some time now that it won't be the lack of doctors and nurses that would cause the NHS to fail. It would be the lack of engineers, purely on the grounds of the amount of technology that they are reliant upon now. But that's I would love to hear from people who would like to argue otherwise with me. But there is some great opportunities, do you think, to address this very weighty problem? I mean, what sort of things do you think? Do you think the NHS should be looking at more preventative technologies, perhaps that we should be now introducing, that we should be encouraging younger people now to take on? And we talked previously about wearables, about telemedicine back in the day. Should we be introducing this kind of technology now so that future generations are not going onto these waiting lists?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really, if you were an outside company, let's say you're in America, and you go into our NHS's websites and you start, going deep into what the NHS are looking for in terms of innovation. So there's a thing called the Innovation Service. And if you look at it today, cancer doesn't even appear on it. Wow. So there's like a big detachment between what the NHS is outwardly saying it's looking for and what it actually needs. Now, there's enough data around what it needs, looking at, the past, at the waiting list as it is, and there's fairly good modelling as to what's going to happen. But there seems to be a complete detachment between that and what the NHS Innovation Service is saying they're looking for. So again, if you look at that website today, December 2025, you'll notice that cancer doesn't even appear there. And then you open up the news and you just see, we see through these numbers that a lot of these conditions, particularly around endoscopy and gastroscopy and colonoscopy, are always, as I see it, are leading towards either cancer prevention or diagnosis, that they predict there's going to be an increase. So that's something that I'm fairly vocal about, is what is going on, that we have an innovation service that doesn't have cancer as a priority, when we've got such great charities out there that are fundraising for solutions that where's what's going on there, really.
So I think the message there is that we're not necessarily joining the dots up as well as we think we are.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And that there are gaps in our not just our understanding, but in the service provision.
Yes,
that is causing some of these bottlenecks. And if we could address those, if we could identify them and address them, that we would be able to reduce these waiting lists in the coming decade.
So things like pill cams, where you can swallow cameras now, and they do there's lots of things I've seen over the years that are enabling people to have endoscopies done either less invasively or faster, or and then there's therapeutic treatments as well. So there's a lot of going on in that space, but there's not been anything recently coming out of NICE that's sort of saying that we should be looking at changes in care pathway using new technologies. It's just, healthcare systems, particularly the NHS, they are risk averse. They do like to have, policies and guidance issued to them, often by NICE, to say this is how they should do things. But there's been a big slowing down, as I see it, of looking at these individual technologies that will solve NHS problems in the way that they looked at them, 3-4 years ago. So we're missing out because industry, particularly those from overseas, look at our country and try to find a way in, and it's just all changed because of changes at NICE due to the procurement changes. Again, we talked about it earlier, but the inability for industry to show solutions or affordability has led to this value-based procurement mindset, which is based around finding the cheapest and not necessarily finding the right solution and promoting it.
So I think this podcast, actually, we could set a challenge here, couldn't we? A call to arms, perhaps, to those who are listening, from industry, from academia as well, from the NHS, and particularly engineers, to actually challenge them to start looking at these solutions from a different perspective,
Yeah.
and to come up with solutions that are really going to change the way the trajectory of this waiting list is taking us.
Yeah. I mean, we're sitting in such rich data. We know what's happened in the past. We know where the pressures are in the future. And yeah, going back to the example earlier of managing skin cancer in a different way, there's so many little things that could make a big difference and could help to get, we talked about earlier, managing people, getting these more awareness of these conditions so patients can find out and get diagnosed sooner, so it doesn't lead to a far worse case. And so, yeah, some of the things I've seen in the last few weeks of people being able to manage their eyesight and glaucoma and other eye conditions at home are great. If you look at anything in ophthalmology, if you go blind, then you're going to be costing the healthcare system a lot of money, because, well, you're going to cost the government a lot of money because you can't live independently. You're going to have carers. Everything is going to change if you lose sight. And so the ability to make sure patients are monitoring their eye condition, they're taking their drugs on time, think about that as just an example of, if it's not treated, what the cost to the country is. And I've seen it, we've worked a lot within stroke and stroke diagnosis, the ability to get patients to thrombectomy fast, to get the clots out. The long-term disability associated with stroke is extremely costly to the country. And so, by not using technology in its full effect, and being able to prevent these big, massive costs to the patient and to the country, they're engineering dreams, aren't they? But you need to not just focus on the technology, but focus on the affordability. And that's where health economic modelling is so important, and something I've been, talking about for a long, long time, is the fact that industry often, when they think of ideas, is they go to clinicians. A clinician could be a key opinion leader, big deal in whatever, orthopedics, and they start talking about a study. They get millions of pounds to run a study, and they're really doing great, and they're telling everybody they've got all these investors, and but they forget that all the clinicians often collecting is that clinical benefit, that sort of safety and efficacy. But that has to be translated into a story for somebody to pay for it. Yeah. And part of the problem, as I see with industry, is this sort of tunnel vision into showing something works and not actually understanding the ideal population to use it in, and what the value drivers are. So if you think about a treatment and you think about all the comparators to that treatment, so there's lots of ways you can be treated for, knee pain, but actually, what are you up against? Which of those comparators for knee pain is the most expensive, with the worst results, with the biggest burden on the healthcare system, with the longest length of stay, with the most readmissions? They're brilliant populations to think, right, we are going to launch this product for this specific subset of that population, because we know that that's not going to work. But what often happens is industry, because they're talking to clinicians and the clinicians aren't business focused, they're saying, well, you know what, if I get somebody from knee pain, I use this, and this, and that's what we'll do the study in. And the study goes on for years and it costs millions, and they don't focus on where the value drivers are. Because if you say that your technology works in this particular subset of the population with these types of comorbidities, and you look at the value of those being the most expensive and high burden, it gives you the scope to charge more for your product. But they don't think like that. And so what often happens is they collect evidence and they miss the value drivers. And by doing early economic modelling, you can actually you can look at the right population, work out who you're going to do your study against based on financial outcomes, long-term outcomes, and then you can sort of understand your pricing corridors. Once you understand your pricing corridors, and you then go on to understand your reimbursement strategy, we'll take regulations out of it, but you can actually think about, where do I go where I can sell the product to the biggest population with the biggest benefit in terms of health outcomes, where I can sell it for the highest cost, and the hospitals get the most and the payer gets the most out of it. That's the ultimate strategy of market access. And it might not be that you launch a product in the UK. It might be America or Australia or somewhere else. That's the business of medical devices. It's really truly looking beyond the clinical, looking at economics, market access strategies, regulatory strategies, it's really complicated and expensive.
I'm just kind of confused just listening to you.
So, but that's going to confuse you.
No, not at all. Mike, thank you so much for explaining. What is a very complicated area, a very emotive subject for many, many people. But clearly, we have a role to play. I think there's a real call to arms here for all of those across the industry. So thank you very much for explaining that to us today.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.